November 19th, 1942. The cold. Gray morning air of Stalingrad bites at the faces of the Sixth Army as it trudges through rubble-choked streets, tanks grinding over debris and snow. You can almost feel the freezing wind gnawing at their uniforms, their boots crunching on icy dust and shattered bricks. Somewhere above, the low rumble of Soviet artillery shakes the walls of ruined factories, and the distant echo of machine gun fire reminds every man that escape is already closing. Field Marshal Paulus stands in his command post, papers trembling in his gloved hands. Outside, the men of the Sixth Army huddle in foxholes and collapsed basements, eyes glazed with exhaustion and frostbite. The encirclement is complete. Soviet pincers have snapped shut like a steel trap, cutting off supplies and leaving tens of thousands of soldiers with dwindling rations and dwindling hope. Hitler's voice, carried over telegraph wires and orders, screams into the cold, not one step back. Paulus, once a loyal and precise soldier, now feels the weight of impossible obedience. He paces the map-strewn table, trying to calculate a breakout, trying to see a sliver of survival through the smothering snow. Outside, soldiers gnaw at frozen horses, desperate for sustenance. Their hands raw and bleeding from frostbite, their lungs rasping in the sub-zero air. Soviet snipers patrol the ruined factories, picking off any soldier daring to peek over crumbling walls. Each step outside the relative cover is a gamble against certain death. Snow falls thick and relentless, covering the dead and the living alike in a uniform white, hiding the horrors yet magnifying the cold, the hunger, the despair. Paulus writes dispatches begging for permission to retreat, to break through the Soviet lines before the encirclement becomes annihilation. But back in Berlin, Hitler's obsession with prestige and myth of invincibility drowns reason, promotes Paulus to field marshal, knowing full well that no German marshal has ever surrendered, expecting fear and shame to keep him fighting. But the Sixth Army is already bleeding out, trapped between iron discipline and winter's cruelty. And yet, the men march on, day after day, into the frozen trap. The Sixth Army's morale cracks like ice over the Volga. You can see it in the vacant eyes of infantry, in the shivering officers trying to maintain formations, in the desperate scavenging for scraps of food. Every failed supply drop, every Soviet bombardment, every collapse of a shelter deepens the sense that Stalingrad is no longer a battlefield, it is a tomb. As night falls, artillery flares illuminate the ruined city in hellish red. Paulus sits alone, staring at the map, knowing the streets are lined with more dead than living. The reality begins to sink in. Obedience to Hitler's orders has turned the army into a herd of walking corpses. And somewhere, deep in the East Prussian HQ, the Führer watches charts and maps, imagining victory. Oblivious to the snow-choked nightmare his commands have created, the tension is suffocating. Soldiers whisper about escape routes. Officers debate the impossible. And in the freezing darkness, the first stirrings of surrender begin to form in the mind of a man trapped by loyalty and frost. The Sixth Army is on the precipice of history, but not the history Hitler intended. December 1st, 1942. The Volga's icy waters reflect a pale, unforgiving sky as the Sixth Army realizes that the noose is tightening. Snow drifts into shattered streets and shell-cratered avenues, coating ruined vehicles, abandoned artillery, and the bodies of soldiers who collapsed from exhaustion and starvation. You can almost feel the biting cold as men clutch their rifles, turning their eyes toward horizons that offer nothing but more snow and more death. Inside command posts, officers argue over dwindling options. Supplies are running out, but Hitler's decree echoes across the frozen expanse. Not one step back. Radios crackle with reports of Soviet artillery strikes, and each message confirms the encirclement is unbreakable. Tanks, once proud instruments of blitzkrieg, are immobilized in the snow, engines frozen and fuel scarce. Even the elite panzer divisions are reduced to static targets, vulnerable to artillery barrages. Paulus walks through the streets of Stalingrad, passing soldiers huddled around makeshift fires. The smell of smoke and frozen bodies fills the air. Some men gnaw on the flesh of dead horses, while others try to melt snow for water, their hands raw and lips blue. There is no morale, her only survival instinct against overwhelming odds. The enemy is everywhere. Snipers in ruined buildings, artillery pounding at every advance, and infantry hunting for the slightest weakness. Back in Berlin, Hitler dismisses the reports from the front. He sees only glory in the steadfastness of the Sixth Army, yet on the ground, the reality is grim. Letters from soldiers to their families lie undelivered in frozen pockets, and whispers of surrender circulate quietly. Some officers consider defiance, but fear and discipline bind them. Every attempt at a breakout is met with freezing winds, enemy fire, and logistical impossibilities. As Christmas approaches, the Sixth Army is a shadow of its former self. Starvation gnaws at stomachs, frostbite claims fingers and toes, and the snow becomes an unrelenting adversary, covering both the living and the dead in silent white. Amid this, Paulus realizes that survival might require a choice. Even Hitler never imagined defiance in the face of the Führer's orders. The pressure mounts. The men of the Sixth Army are not just fighting the Soviets, they are fighting the winter. Exhaustion and the cruel mandate from above. Outside, the Soviets tighten their encirclement. Armored columns advance from all directions, artillery barrages become incessant, and every hour the Sixth Army remains in place, the casualties grow. Paulus paces, haunted by visions of surrender and the shame it will bring, but haunted even more by the horror of losing his men to starvation and frost. Stalingrad is no longer a city, it is a crucible, testing loyalty, courage, humanity itself, under the harshest conditions imaginable. And then, a quiet reckoning begins. Letters to Berlin go unanswered. Radios fall silent. The Sixth Army knows the end is inevitable. Soldiers whisper to one another about escape routes that do not exist, about surrender that seems as impossible as survival, and about a leader who values pride over life. The cold does not merely bite it, erodes hope, and Stalingrad's winter becomes a weapon as lethal as any rifle or artillery shell. The trap is complete. Encirclement is total. The Sixth Army teeters between obedience and annihilation. And in that frozen silence, the first real thoughts of surrender creep into the minds of men who have been told to fight to the last, knowing the choice will forever stain history. January 10th, 1943, the sun rises over a city of ruin, casting long shadows across shattered buildings, frozen rivers, and streets littered with wrecked vehicles. The air is heavy with smoke and the acrid scent of burnt ammunition. Frost covers every surface. Every breath hangs in the air as a visible reminder of the cold that seeps into bones and morale alike. You can almost feel the desperation of soldiers huddled together, clutching rifles that weigh more with each passing day, as hunger gnaws at them like a relentless predator. Field Marshal Paulus walks through the remnants of command posts, stepping over men frozen to the snow or collapsed from exhaustion. Reports from the front lines are dire. Artillery positions destroyed, communication lines severed, medical supplies non-existent. Starvation is rampant, and frostbite has claimed thousands. Even seasoned officers cannot hide the terror in their eyes. Each man knows that the Soviet encirclement is unbreakable. Every attempt at breakout has been met with annihilation. It is a command that is transformed into a psychological weapon. As every officer wrestles with the impossible choice between obedience and humanity. In letters to his staff, Paulus notes the hopelessness of the situation. His men are dying not only from bullets and shells, but from the merciless winter. Horses and dogs, once companions in transport, are now frozen carcasses, and some soldiers have resorted to consuming them to survive. The Soviets continue tightening their grip. Their artillery, coordinated and relentless, pounds every stronghold. Snipers pick off the wounded and the weary. The Sixth Army's armor, mostly immobilized by snow and lack of fuel, sits as static targets for Soviet gunners. Even morale, the invisible armor of any army, has crumbled under the twin assaults of starvation and frostbite. Inside Stalingrad, small acts of heroism occur amidst horror. Medics carry wounded through waist-deep snow. Engineers attempt to salvage what little artillery remains. Soldiers share the last scraps of bread and water. Yet these acts, noble as they are, cannot stave off the inevitable. Each day sees more men falling not to bullets alone, but to exhaustion, disease, and the bitter cold that penetrates the soul. Paulus convenes his senior officers in a crumbling building. Their faces, pale and hollow, mirror the reality he cannot ignore. The Sixth Army is a corpse moving through snow. Supplies are exhausted, and any hope of reinforcement or breakout is a fantasy. Officers whisper the word that cannot be spoken aloud: surrender. The idea is heresy in the Führer's eyes, yet it becomes the only viable path to save what remains of their men. If they surrender, they will live but enter a world of captivity, humiliation, and uncertain survival in Soviet hands. The weight of this decision crushes them. Letters, orders, and desperate pleas to Berlin go unanswered. The world outside has moved on, yet within the frozen city, time is measured in the slow death of men who have nowhere to run. The breaking point comes quietly. It is not announced with fanfare or gunfire. It is felt in the hushed tones of officers, in the shared glances of soldiers who have seen too much death to continue blindly. Obedience has failed them. Survival demands a betrayal of orders. And in the shadows of Stalingrad, amidst snow and ruin, the Sixth Army prepares to take the step that Hitler had declared impossible. January 31st, 1943, a bitter wind sweeps through the ruins of Stalingrad. It's cutting through coats, uniforms, and flesh alike. The city lies in eerie silence, broken only by distant artillery and the groans of frostbitten men. You can almost feel the cold biting at the soles of boots. In the fingertips of soldiers, as if nature itself is conspiring with the Soviets to crush the remnants of the Sixth Army inside a shattered command post. Field Marshal Paulus, now a symbol of impossible obedience, meets with his generals. The decision is unanimous yet heavy. Surrender is no longer a choice, it is a necessity. Their men are starving, freezing, and dying by the hundreds each day. To continue fighting is to sentence the survivors to certain death outside. Soviet troops advance carefully, wary of desperate resistance but buoyed by intelligence that the German command is finally ready to yield. The first white flags are raised tentatively, fluttering in the icy wind. Soldiers peer out from snow-covered trenches, weapons in trembling hands, unsure whether this is a trick or the reality they've been denied for weeks. Paulus, promoted to Field Marshal by Hitler just days before a promotion intended to shame him into defiance, now prepares to surrender. A moment that marks the first time in history a German Field Marshal has yielded. The weight of this act, both symbolic and literal, is immense. For the men, surrender is a lifeline. For Hitler, it is a bitter, humiliating blow. As columns of weary soldiers march out of the ruins, the snow crunches beneath their boots like brittle bones. Faces are hollow, eyes glazed over from frostbite and hunger, yet there is a flicker of relief they are still alive. Families, comrades, and entire units have been reduced to shadows, yet the living cling to whatever humanity remains. The Soviets, observing this mass of prisoners, cannot hide their astonishment. Over 91,000 Germans are captured, the majority succumbing to the harsh winter, disease, and malnutrition before even leaving the encirclement. Each step they take is a march through history. A journey that transforms defeat into a monumental lesson in hubris, obedience, and the cruelty of war. From the perspective of Hitler's East Prussian headquarters, the news is unbearable. The Sixth Army, the pride of the Wehrmacht, has crumbled not through lack of courage, but through inflexible orders and the harsh reality of an unforgiving battlefield. Propaganda must be rewritten. Speeches must be retooled. The Führer's obsession with prestige has created a catastrophe on an unprecedented scale. In the streets of Stalingrad, silence reigns, where once there was the roar of German artillery. Smoke still rises from smoldering buildings, mingling with the frost in the air. This is the grave of the Sixth Army, frozen tomb for dreams of conquest, and the ultimate proof that even the most disciplined forces can be undone by arrogance, nature, and the relentless pressure of encirclement. The surrender of Paulus and his army is more than a military defeat, it is a psychological earthquake. For the Allies, it is a signal that the tide has irrevocably turned on the Eastern Front. For the Germans, it is a moment of reckoning, a grim acknowledgement that no order, no matter how absolute, can overcome the harsh truths of war. The frozen plains surrounding Stalingrad are eerily still as the last remnants of the Sixth Army shuffle toward Soviet lines. The surrender is complete, but its consequences ripple far beyond the snow-laden city. You can almost hear the echo of boots crunching through icy rubble, a stark reminder of lives lost and ambitions shattered. In Moscow, Stalin receives word of the surrender with a mix of triumph and calculation. Newspapers and radio broadcasts announce the capture of 91,000 German soldiers, a staggering blow to the Wehrmacht's morale. For the Soviet people, this moment becomes a symbol of resilience and unbreakable will. Proof that the Red Army can stand firm against even the most disciplined enemy. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Hitler's fury knows no bounds. In private meetings, he rants at generals and advisors, refusing to fully acknowledge the catastrophic error and insisting on Paulus's no-retreat order. The loss of the Sixth Army becomes a haunting specter over every subsequent campaign. It's a constant reminder that rigid command and delusions of glory can destroy even the best-trained forces. For the survivors of Stalingrad, life becomes a daily struggle. POW camps in the Soviet Union are harsh, and many succumb to the bitter winter, starvation, and disease. Yet, their endurance also becomes a testament to human resilience. A grim narrative interwoven with the horrors of war. Letters, diaries, and whispered recollections from these men would later inform historians and storytellers about the brutal reality behind Hitler's proclamations. The surrender reshaped the war on the Eastern Front. German armies, once seemingly unstoppable, now face a reinvigorated Soviet advance. The psychological blow to German officers and troops cannot be overstated. Or once they marched with confidence, now doubt and fear creep into ranks. For the world, Stalingrad becomes a defining moment of World War II. It is remembered not just for the staggering loss of life, but for the lessons it imparts, that arrogance can blind leaders, that nature is an unforgiving ally, and that even the mightiest armies can be broken by persistence, courage, and the harsh reality of circumstance. From Hitler's delusional speeches in his East Prussian bunkers to the solemn march of frostbitten soldiers into Soviet captivity, the Battle of Stalingrad transforms from a tale of hubris into a cautionary epic. It signals the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany and demonstrates, in stark detail, the price of obsession and inflexibility in warfare. As the snow continues to blanket the ruins, the echoes of guns, the screams, and the cries of surrender fade into history, but the story of the Sixth Army endures. It is a reminder that human will, strategy, and the forces of nature together can decide the fate of nations, and that the darkest hour, when met with reality, often illuminates the path to inevitable change.